So in this video, we're going to review how to find percents in consumer math. And what I mean by consumer math is going to be stuff like calculating sales tax, tips, and discounts. And first, we're going to learn a couple of shortcuts in working with these percents. Now, on page 9 already, you've already gotten a little bit comfortable with how to find a part out of a whole given the percent. So I want to remind you guys that up here, to find 80% of a 20 question test, 80 was the part out of 100, and we want to know what part of the 20 question test is the 80%. So when we cross multiply and divide, we got our 16 questions. Now this proportion, we're going to take a look at down here for the first one. 20% of 82.14, we found that one right here when we found 20% of the $82.14 to see that that person would leave a $16.43 tip. So right here is where we found 20% of the 82.14. Right here for the 8% of 350 was the question about Noah, where we found 8% of his $350 investment. And for the last one, we found 10% of something that cost $300. So the goal for right now is to look at just these proportions from these word problems and see if there is a shortcut instead of having to cross multiply and divide. And there is a shortcut. Now, first thing that I want to point out to you guys is that we're just working with the proportions from the 4 word problems from up above that you know how to cross multiply and divide, okay? Now, when working with percents, we can reveal a shortcut. So I want to throw this out there. 80 out of 100 is the fraction. What is 80 hundredths as a decimal? 0.80. So we have 80%, 80 hundredths would be the fraction, and 0.80 is the decimal. All right, for the next one, 20% is 20 out of 100, and I'm just taking that fraction and making it the decimal. Notice that the equals x over 20 is the same, and the equals x over 82.4 is the same. Now for this one, I'm just going to take the fraction for the 8% and make it the decimal. That's 8 hundredths. And here we're going to take the fraction and make it the decimal. So now I want you to just re-strategize. When we find 80% of 20, imagine it as a 0.80 of 20. Now when we solve this equation, y'all, to get rid of a denominator, we would multiply both sides by the 20. So over here, we're going to be multiplying 0.80 by 20. So in the calculator, you can multiply the decimal times the number, and that'll tell you 80% of 20. When finding 80% of 20, you can just multiply in the calculator the 0.80 times the 20, because it cancels out over here and x is all by itself. And on this side, when we do the 0.80 times the 20, it's going to tell us what 20% is. So 0.80 in the calculator is 80% of 20, so times 20. And that's the 16 questions that somebody got right. For that problem where we wanted to know 20% of the 82.14 that somebody would leave for a tip, all you've got to do is take the 20% as a decimal and now multiply it by the 82.14. And right there you can see that the tip would have been $16.43. And that was what we got up here. For the third question, when we wanted to know the 8% that Noah made of his $350 investment, that 8%, we can just multiply the 0.08 times the $350, and we're done. And that'd be the $28 that Noah made from his investment. And for the question about 10% of the sales tax in Washington, D.C., 10% is the part out of the whole, and we can set up a proportion, but the shortcut is, if 10% is 0.10, you can just multiply the 0.10 times the $300 to see that somebody would pay $30 in sales tax. So the shortcut is to just multiply the decimal by the dollar amount, or the decimal by the number of questions, and that'll tell you what the percent was. So now for this next series of questions, we just want to find 10% of each of these numbers. Now, I'm not going to write the answers down on my key, but I'm going to have the calculator up, and you can just follow along and write the answers down in your packet. So if I want to know 10% of 35, I'm going to multiply 0.10 times 35. All right, you should write down 3.5. Now for the next one, we want to know 10% of 545. So 10% is 0.10 times 545. It's 54.5. You should write down 54.5. Now for the next one, 10% of 3,105. So 10% is 0.10 times 3,105. Please write down 310.5. And now for the last one, it's going to be 10% of 138.5. So 0.10 times 138.5. What we're saying is that if something costs $138.50 and you're in Washington, D.C. and have to pay a 10% sales tax, you're going to have to pay an additional $13.85. Sales tax is going to be something that we explore next. So the numbers that you wrote down were 3.5, 54.5. You wrote down a 310.5. And you wrote down a 13.85. Do you notice something about finding 10% of any number? 10% of 35 was 3.5. 10% of 545 was 54.5. 10% of 3,105 was 310.5. And 10% of 138.5 was 13.85. Y'all, what happens to the decimal when we're finding 10% of any number? 35, the decimal is right here. Boom, 3.5. The decimal for 545.0, move it over once. Boom, 54.5. The decimal here, it got moved over once. The decimal here got moved over once. So we have found another shortcut that when finding 10% of any number, you just got to move the decimal over one time. So now let's flip over, and I want you guys to pause the video, and I want you to find at the top 10% of all of those numbers. And when you play the video again, the answers will be there. All right, so go ahead and pause the video now and flip the page over, and then we'll talk about how to find 10% of all of those numbers. All right, so hopefully you've already found the 10% of each of these on your own by moving the decimal over to the left once. So 42, you move it over once, and it's 4.2. Now, I put zeros here because I want these to all look like money, because we are going to be working a lot with money in the next part of our unit. So go ahead and get comfortable with making it look like money. If something was $42, 10% would be $4.20. If we move this decimal over once from the 17.2, when that decimal moves over one time, it's going to be 1.72. When you move this decimal over once, it's going to be 12.00. And if something was $1.73 and we had to pay a 10% tax, we'd move the decimal over once and get 0.173, but rounding for money, the 3 would keep that to a 7. We don't need to round up. For the next one, when you move it over once, it's going to be 98.8, and as money, it'd be 98.80. For this one, when you move it over once, 104.5 is 104.50 for money. This one, when you move the decimal over once, it's 46.77. And this one, when you move the decimal over once, it'd be 220.00. All right? Now what we're going to do is explore shortcuts for finding 5% and 20% mentally. All right, so first, 10% of 30. You guys should be okay with this at this point. We're just going to move the decimal over once. All right, and that's where I got the $3. And in case you want me to prove it, I can do 0.10 times 30, and there's the 3. Okay? Now, if 10% is 3, 5% is what? You're just cutting the percent in half. So what's half of $3.50? Or sorry, $3. That's where I'm getting this $1.50. Okay, you just take half of it. If 10% is 3, 5% would be half, so just cut it in half. Now for 20%, what we're going to do is double it. So back to the $3 for 10%. If 10% is 3, 20%, this doubles, so now we're just going to double the 3 to be $6. Okay? Now, lastly, if I want to find 15% of anything mentally, so 15% of 30, we already found 10% to be 3. 5% is 150. So 10% plus 5% is going to be 15%. So I'm just adding the 3 to the 150 to get the 450. Now, of course, I can take my calculator out to prove that 15%, so 0.15, of the 30 is the 4.5. We're reviewing mental math because you'd be surprised how smart you can look in real life by being able to quickly calculate 5, 15, and 20% for sales taxes or discounts when you're trying to save money in a store. Now I want you to pause the video, and here's the on your own section, and you're going to try to find now 10%, 5%, 20%, and 15% of the two numbers. When you're ready, you can hit play to check your answers. All right, so you can check now. For 10%, when you move the decimal over once, it's 4. Cut it in half, it's 2. Now 10% gets doubled to be 20%, so 4 times 2 is the 8. And if you add the 5% and 10%, you're going to add 4 and 2 together to get 6. Over here, when you move the decimal over once, it's 6.2. Cut it in half, you're going to get $3.10. If you double the 10%, we're going to get $12.40. And if you add the 10 and 5% together, so 620 plus 310, you're going to get 9.3. And that takes care of how you can quickly compute percentages of numbers. Thank you.